has this seemingly new culture of victimhood and self-righteous pity party that we're witnessing throughout the West been brought about? And what does it mean? And what are the implications for a society whose moral culture is increasingly being defined by victimhood and projected oppression? And I want to stress the word victimhood, and it will become more apparent as this presentation unfolds. In 1993, art critic Robert Hughes published a chilling prophetic book called Culture of Complaint, in which he prognosticated that the U.S. was doomed to become increasingly an infantilized culture of victimhood. It was against the backdrop of the just emerging grievance industry that now has a chokehold on discourse in the Anglosphere and much of the West. Today, victimhood culture is impossible to miss, and examples of adherence to its values are everywhere. Some are offended by others' hairstyle, music, or the way men sit on public transportation. Some are offended by voice characterizations in animated films, while others are traumatized by Halloween costumes. Well, this subject has been tackled in a study titled Microaggression and Moral Cultures by sociologists Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning in the Journal of Comparative Sociology. Campbell and Manning argue that the U.S. is now transitioning into a victimhood culture that combines the previous moral cultures of honor and dignity and is adding a new layer. In that, honor culture's quickness to take offense with dignity culture's use of third parties to police and punish transgressions. I'm going to paraphrase the ideas distilled in this study as broken down by several other authors to give you a general understanding of this very interesting thesis. In honor cultures, people, men, maintain their honor by responding to insults, slights, violations of rights, by self-help violence. Generally, honor cultures exist where the rule of law is weak. In honor cultures, people protected themselves, their families, and their property through having a reputation for swift violence. During the 19th century, most Western societies began the moral transition toward dignity cultures, in which all citizens were legally endowed with legal rights. In such societies, persons' property and rights are defended by recourse to third parties, usually courts, police, and so forth, that, if necessary, wield violence on their behalf. Dignity cultures practice tolerance and are much more peaceful than honor cultures. Campbell and Manning describe how the culture of victimhood, in which people are encouraged to respond to even the slightest unintentional offense, as in honor culture, but they must appeal for help to powerful others, including employers or administrative bodies, to whom they must make the case that they've been victimized. And this gives rise to an intense effort to identify oneself as a fragile and aggrieved victim. Critics of the culture of victimhood are often attacked as abusers themselves, perpetuating a culture of harm and assault. Frequently, the response that embattled critics is to assert that they are victims as well. Men criticized as sexist for challenging radical feminism defend themselves as victims of reverse sexism. People criticized as being unsympathetic proclaim their own history of victimization. In courts, during sentencing, it's common, even de rigueur, for felons to proclaim that their history of victimization contributed to their harmful illegal actions. In our culture of victimhood, victims can be excused for victimizing others, taking away the rights, freedoms, and autonomy of others in service of their own victimization. This new moral culture even comes complete with its own vocabulary. Noun or ism plus privilege can't have a new moral culture without isms, trigger warning, microaggressions, safe spaces, and the usual buzzwords: hateful, binary, intersectional, speak truth to power, solidarity, progressive, oppression, social justice, fascist, ableism, identity group plus community, journey, and others I can't really remember at the moment. When victims publicize microaggressions, they call attention to what they see as the deviant behavior of others. In doing so, they also call attention to their own victimization. Indeed, many ways of attracting the attention and sympathy of third parties emphasize or exacerbate the low status of the aggrieved. People portray themselves as oppressed by the powerful, as damaged, disadvantaged, and needy. What many find shocking about the culture of victimhood is that it involves rejecting previously conventional moral injunctions to ignore insults, recognize the good intentions of those who accidentally give offense, and be charitable and civil toward those whom we disagree with. They instead illustrate a high sensitivity to slight, such that verbal offenses or even disagreements merit a serious response. So who cares if we're becoming a culture of victimhood? Everyone should, as this mentality is not only self-destructive, it's totally polarizing. This kind of mentality makes it ever more difficult to resolve disputes, both social and political, as it removes the necessary give and take, as well as being able to agree to disagree, and turns every difference into a battle between good, us, and evil, them. Consider a 2014 study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which examined why opposing groups, including Democrats and Republicans, found compromise so difficult. The researchers concluded that there was widespread political motive attribution asymmetry in which both sides attributed their own group's aggressive behavior to love, but the opposite sides to hatred. Today, millions of Americans believe that their side is basically benevolent, while the other side is evil. Victimhood culture also sees their perceived oppressors as evil, thus generally seeking to restrict expression in order to protect the sensibilities of its advocates. Victimhood claims the right to say who is and who is not allowed to speak. Anyone who voices opposition is a bigot. All speech not agreed with is hate speech. Questions or comments such as, "Where are you from? You speak English very well. You are so interesting looking. I don't see race, I see a person." All of these are standard examples of microaggressions, and even if no ill intent is meant, are cause for the oversensitive to be slighted and with malice and rage respond in a furious and emotional manner. And if you want to get an idea of the ludicrous nature of microaggressions, head on over to MTV and watch the asinine Francesca Ramsey and her show Decoded, which is basically a show explaining why all others for all time have been and will be victims of whites.
Scan the internet and you're bound to see racial pride hashtags and movements. But there's still one pride movement that's considered a serious faux pas. Can you guess which one? Whiteness. Whiteness is being white. It's racism. Racism. Whiteness. Racially insensitive about cultural appropriation, doing the intersection. Where he's racist? It's in an oppressive culture problem with cultural appropriation. We're all racist with white supremacy. White marginalized people by a white system and oppressed them. Really, really white.
And funnily enough, legend has it that MTV used to play music videos. Of course, there have been criticisms of the study by those that were triggered, ironically, by the title and felt oppressed by its content, and you can also find links to that rebuttal in the description. Either way, you can see this happening everywhere, and as I've said, it's a race to the bottom, and a fight on who can and cannot be a victim. And be aware, just because you're not a white, cisgender, heterosexual male doesn't mean you're safe from this new moral totalitarianism. Should prevailing victimhood winds change? For example, are blacks really a victim class if they have language privilege? Are Asians really a victim if they have intact family privilege? Are Native Americans really a victim if they have financial privilege in the way of banned casinos? Are gay men really victim if they are cisgendered? Can white women really be raped by non-white men, as rape is an expression of power plus privilege, and white women have both? I actually did see this mockingly float around the internet a while back, and sadly enough, I've kept running into example after example of white women in real life who utterly believe this and sympathize with their rapists because they lack white privilege, and in some cases were hesitant to involve the authorities. And whites being supportive of their rapists of color is not confined to women. This is Karsten Nordal Hauken, a heterosexual man who was raped by a Somali asylum seeker and participated in a new documentary titled I Unto Me. After he was raped, he wrote that, "For me, it resulted in years of depression, abuse, loneliness, and isolation." However, with the new culture of victimhood, he felt even more guilt that the Somali asylum seeker that sodomized him was deported from Norway. This new shift in moral culture is toxic to all peoples, regardless of gender, orientation, color, or creed. This new paradigm also uses what George Carlin called soft language, or the newspeak that's being formed around the culture of victimhood. Microaggression basically equates to easily offended people. Safe spaces is segregation by another name. Trigger warnings equals censorship. Privilege equals moral demerits within the new moral construct. And white privilege, the neutron bomb or ultimate kryptonite within the new moral framework. And if you're white, it pretty much means you have no right to an opinion or to express one.
Black people being killed by police.
Okay.
What has Trump said about that?
What about white people being killed by police?
Fuck off!
That's not racist, though.
No.
Fuck off if a white guy's killed by a policeman. Only a black life matters.
We already know that white people, that's not a fucking issue compared to the black people that are gunned down every single day by police.
Gunned down every single day by...
Mass deportation.
Hey, I'm racist. That's not racist. I'm racist.
Hell no, that's not racist. That's telling the
You've
truth.
never experienced
That's
oppression
telling
in
the
your
truth.
entire fucking life. Neither have I.
You don't know me.
You're fucking a white male.
So?
You're a white man.
White people don't know what it's like to be poor.
Bullshit.
That's what Bernie Sanders said.
Reverse first, fucking old ass piece of shit. You're fucking old. Old.
Just a postscript to this video with Aid Skrillex and Carl the Cuck and their steadfast belief that the killing of whites is not an issue. Just to be clear, 494 whites were killed by law enforcement in 2015. Basically half of the total of 990, as opposed to 258 blacks killed. But the culture of victimhood, as any reasonable person knows, is not about reality. This girl is culturally appropriating hairstyles, thus she's an oppressor, while Michelle Obama is not when she does it. This Halloween getup of a Japanese traditional costume is cultural appropriation and racism, while this man wearing the traditional clothes of Western men is acceptable. And Star Trek actress Zoe Saldana can be lambasted for wearing blackface for her new movie, even though she's black. The hypocrisy for those not entranced by this delusionary value system is simply mind-numbing. While I'm not sure if I'm going to agree with the authors that there is a fundamental shift taking place within the fabric of moral culture, I do, however, believe the creation of extreme identity politics and a culture of victimhood at the same time as seismic demographic changes are rumbling through the West does not bode well for the stability of our societies. And the hatred for whites spewed across university campuses, the media, and on the tips of tongues of so many in the veiled soft language of white privilege is reaching 1994 Hutu on Tutsi radio broadcast levels. The rise of a victim culture morality that pits groups against each other and all groups against Western people bodes ill for future social and political stability, no matter what race, ethnicity, gender, or orientation. As this new moral code of victimhood always needs new oppressors, anyone can have the rug of victimhood torn out from underneath them. Just ask Dolce & Gabbana. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Also, I just want to point your attention to two other channels that have great insight and are well worth a look. Millennial Woes and Think Vegan. Have a look, you won't be disappointed.